Welcome in, and thank you guys for coming to this storytelling session. Please let me know if I sound okay. I appreciate it. So, right to the storytelling. The Drama of the Forest, Romance and Adventure by Arthur Hemming. Illustrated by the Arthur with reproductions for a series of his paintings owned by the Royal Ontario Museum. Garden City, New York, and Toronto, Doubleday, Page and Company, 1921. Introduction. It was in the childhood that the primitive spirit first came whispering to me. It was then that I had my first day dreams of the Netherland, of its forests, its rivers and lakes, its hunters and trappers and traders, its fur runners, birds, its fish, its trees, its flowers, and its seasons. Even in childhood, I was forever wondering, what is daily going on in the great northern forest, not just this week, this month, or this season, but what is actually occurring day by day throughout the cycle of the entire year. It was that thought that fascinated me, and when I grew into boyhood, I began delving into books of northern travel, but I did not find the answers there. With the years, this ever-present wonder grew until it so possessed me that at last it inspired me away from the city. While I was still in my teens, led me along the path of ever-changing and ever-increasing pleasures, showing me the world, not as men had mauled and marred it, but as the master of life had made it, in all its original beauty and splendor. Nor was this all. It led me to observe and ponder over the daily pages of the most profound and yet the most fascinating book that man has ever tried to read. And though it seemed to me my feeble attempt to decipher its texts were always futile, it has, nevertheless, not only taught me to love nature with an ever-increasing passion, but it has inspired me an infinite homage toward the Almighty, for, as Emerson says, in the woods we return to reason of faith. Then I feel that nothing can befall me in life, no disgrace, no calamity, leaving me my eyes, which nature cannot repair. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite space, all mean egoism vanishes. I am a lover of uncontained and immortal beauty. So, to make my life dream come true, to contemplate in all its thrilling action and undying splendor the drama of the forest, I traveled 23 times through various parts of the vast northern woods between Maine and Alaska, and covered thousands upon thousands of miles by canoe, pack train, snowshoes. Back to you. a dog train, buckboard, timber raft, prairie schooner, lumber wagon, and alligator. No one trip ever satisfied me or afforded me the knowledge or the experience I sought, for traveling a single section of the forest was not unlike making one's way along a single street of the metropolis and then trying to persuade oneself that one knew all about the city's life. So back again I went, and all seasons of the year, to encamp in the great timberland that swept from Atlantic to the Pacific. Thus, it has taken me 33 years to gather the information this volume contains, and my only hope in writing it is that perhaps others may have had the same daydream, and that in this book they may find a reliable and satisfactory answer to all their wonderings. By making my dream come true, what delight it gave me, what sport and travel it afforded me, what toil and sweat it caused me, what food and rest it brought me, what charming places it led me through, what interesting people it ranged beside me, what romance it unfolded before me, and into that thrilling adventure it plunged me. But before we paddled down the winding wilderness aisles toward the great stage upon which Diana and all her attendant huntsmen and forest creatures may appear, I wish to explain that in compliance with the wishes of the leading actors who actually lived their parts of this story, fictitious names have been given to the principal characters and to the principal trade posts, lakes, rivers, herein depicted. Therefore, furthermore, in order to give the reader a more interesting, complete, and faithful description of the daily and yearly life of the forest dwellers, as I have observed it, I have taken the liberty of weaving together the more interesting facts I have gathered, both first and second hand, into one continuous narrative, as though it all happened in a single year. And in order to retain all the primitive local color, the unique costumes, and the fascinating romance of the fur trade days as I witnessed them in my 20s, though much of the life has already passed away, the scene is set to represent a certain year in the early 90s. Arthur Hemingway. Now the story begins, the drama of the forest, romance and adventure, her father, the free trader. It was September 9th, 1890. From sunrise to sunset, through mist, sunshine, shower, and shadow, we traveled. And the nearer we drew to our first destination, the wilder the country became, the more waterfowl we saw, and the more the river banks were marked with traces of big game. Here, signs told us that 3 caribou had crossed the stream. The muddy water was still trickling into the hoof prints of the moose. And yonder, a bear had been fishing. Finally, the day of the arrival dawned, and as I paddled, I spent much of my time dreaming of the adventure before me. As our beautiful Birken craft still sped on her way, the handsome bow parted the shimmering waters, and a passing breeze sent little running waves gurgling along her side, while the splendor of the autumn sun was reflecting on the far-reaching row of dazzling ripples that dance upon the water, making our voyagers lower their eyes and the traders doze again. There was no other sign of life except the eagle soaring in and out among the fleecy clouds slowly passing overhead. All around was panorama of enchanting forest. My traveling companion was a free trader whose name was Spear, a tall, stoop-shouldered man with heavy eyebrows and shaggy, drooping mustache. The way we met was amusing. It happened in a certain frontier town. His first question was as to whether I was single. His second as to whether my time was my own. Then he slowly looked me over from head to foot. He seemed to be measuring my stature and strength and to be noticing the color of my eyes and hair. Narrowing his vision, he scrutinized me more carefully than before, for now he seemed to be reading my character, if not my soul. Then smiling, he blurted out, "Come, be my guest for a couple of weeks, will you?" I laughed. He frowned, but on realizing that my mirth was caused only by surprise, he smiled again and let flow a vivid description of the place he called Spearhead. It was a home of the North fur trade. It was the center of the great timber region. It was the heart of the vast fertile belt that was rapidly becoming the greatest of all farming districts. It was built on a fountainhead of gigantic water power. It virtually stood over the very vault that contained the rich veins of minerals to be found in the whole Dominion. At least that's what he said. And he also assured me that the government had realized it too, for was it not going to hew a provincial highway clean through the forest to Spearhead? Was it not going to build a fleet of steamers to ply upon the lakes and rivers in that section? And was it not going to build a line of railroad to the town itself in order to connect it with the new transcontinental and thus put it in the communication with great commercial centers of the East and the West? In fact, he also impressed upon me that Spearhead was a town created for young men who were not averse to becoming wealthy in whatever line of business they might choose. It seemed that great riches were already there and had but to be lifted. Would I go? But I explained that although I was single and quite free, I was not a businessman. He became crestfallen and presently revived enough to exclaim, "Well, what the dickens are you?" "An artist," I replied. "Oh, I see. Well, we need an artist very badly. You'll have the field all to yourself in Spearhead. Besides, your pictures of the fur trade and the pioneer's life would eventually become historical and bring you no end of wealth. You had better come, better decide right away, or some other artist chap will get ahead of you." But when I further explained that I was going to spend the winter in the wilderness, that I had already written to the Hudson Bay factor at Fort Consolation, and that he was expecting me, spirit-loaded. Bully boy. And slapped me on the shoulder. He chuckled. Why, my town is just across the lake from Fort Consolation. A mere 5-mile paddle, old chap. And remember, I extend to you the freedom of Spearhead in the name of the future mayor and man alive. I am leaving for there tomorrow morning in a big 4-fathom birch bark and 4 Indian canoemen. Be my guest. It would cost you a farthing, and we'll make the trip together. I gladly accepted. The next morning, we started. Free Trader Spear was a character, and I afterward learned that he was an Oxford University man who, having been plowed, left for Canada, entered the service of the Hudson Bay Company, and had finally been moved to Fort Consolation, where he served 7 years. Learned the fur trading business and resigned to become a free trader, as all fur traders are called, who carry on business in opposition to the great company. We were 8 days upon the trip, but strange to say, during each day's travel towards Spearhead, his conversation in reference to the thriving town made it appear to grow smaller and smaller, until at last it actually dwindled down to such a point that about sunset on the day we were to arrive, he turned to me and casually remarked, "Presently you'll see Fort Consolation and the Indian village beyond Spearhead. It's just across the lake. And by, my boy, I forgot to tell you that Spearhead is just my log shack. But it's a nice little place, and you'll like it when you pay us a visit, for I want you to meet my wife." Then our canoe passed a jutting point of the land, and in a moment the scene was changed. We were no longer on the river, but were now upon a lake, and the wilderness seemed suddenly left behind. Next chapter, at Fort Consolation. On the outer end of the distant point, a cluster of poplars shaded a small, clapboarded log house. There, in charge of Fort Consolation, lived the factor of the Hudson Bay Company. Beyond a little lawn enclosed by a picket fence stood the large storehouse. The lower floor of this was used as a trading room. The upper story served for a fur loft, behind where seemed a number of shanties. Then another larger building in which dog sleds and great birch bark canoes were stored. Further away was a long, open shed under which those big canoes were built. Then a few small huts were where the half-breeds lived, with the exception of the factor's house. All the buildings were of rough-hewn logs plastered with clay. Around the sweeping bend of the bay was a village of teepees in which the Indian fur traders and their families spent their midsummer. Crowning the knoll, in the rear stood a quaint little church with a small tin spire glistening in the sun, capped by a cross that spread its tiny arms to heaven. On the hill in the background, the 2 worn pines swayed their shaggy heads and softly whispered to that the first gentle touch of civilization in the wilderness. Presently, at irregular intervals, guns were discharged along the shore, beginning at the point near the canoe and running round the curve of the bay to the Indian camp, where a brisk fusillade took place. A moment later, the Hudson Bay Company flag fluttered over Fort Consolation. Plainly, the arrival of our canoes was causing excitement at the post. Trader Spear laughed aloud. "That's one old Mackenzie. He talked by canoe for the Hudson Bay inspector. He's generally due about this time." For all their directions, men, women, and children were swarming toward the landing, and when our canoes arrived, there must have been fully 400 Indians present. The first to greet us was a factor, Mackenzie, a gruff, bearded Scotsman with a clean-shaven upper lip, gray hair, and piercing gray eyes. When we entered the factor's house, we found it to be a typical wilderness home of an officer of the Hudson Bay Company, and therefore as far unlike the interiors of fur traders' houses as shown upon the stage, movie screens, or in magazine illustrations, as it is possible to imagine. Upon the walls we saw neither mounted heads nor skins of wild animals, nor were fur robes spread across the floors, as one would expect to find after reading the average story of Hudson Bay life. On the contrary, the well-scrubbed floors were perfectly bare, and the walls were papered from top to bottom with countless illustrations cut from London Graphic and Illustrated London News. The pictures not only took the place of wallpaper, making the house more nearly windproof, but also afforded endless amusement to those who had spent therein the long winter months. The house was furnished sparsely with simple handmade furniture, and had more the appearance of utility than of beauty. At supper time, we sat down with Miss Mackenzie, the factor's half-breed wife, who took the head of the table. After the meal, we gathered in the living room before an open fire, over the mantelpiece of which there were no guns, no powder horns, nor even a pair of snowshoes. For a fur trader would no more think of hanging his snowshoes there than a city dweller would think of hanging his overshoes over the drawing-room mantel. Upon the mantel shelf, however, stood a few unframed family photos and some books, while above hung a rustic picture frame, the only frame to be seen in the room. It contained the motto, working in colored yarns, "God bless our home." When pipes were lighted and we had drawn close to the fire, the factor occupied a quaint, homemade, rough-hewn affair known as the factor's chair. On the underside of the seat were inscribed the signatures and dates of accession to that throne of all the factors who had reigned at the post during the past 87 years. Chapter 3. a mighty hunter. After the two traders had finished talking mushquash fur trade business, they began reminiscing on the more picturesque side of their work. And as I had come to spend the winter with the fur hunters on their hunting grounds, the subject naturally turned to that well-worn topic, the famous Nimrods of the North. It brought forth many an interesting tale, for both my companions were well versed in such lore, and in order to keep up my end, I quoted from Warren's book on the Ojibways. As an illustration of the kind and abundance of animals which then covered the country, it is stated that the Ojibwe hunters named Noka, the grandfather of Chief White Fisher, killed in one day's hunt, starting from the mouth of Crow Wing River, 16 elk, 4 buffalo, 5 deer, 3 bear, a lynx, and 1 porcupine. There was a trader wintering at the time at Crow Wing, and for his winter supply of meat, Noka presented him with the fruit of his day's hunt. My host grunted that was the biggest day's bag he had ever heard of, and Trader Spear, withdrawing his pipe from his mouth, remarked, "Noka must have been a great hunter. I would like to have had his trade. But nevertheless, I have heard of an Indian who might have been a match for him. He too was an Ojibwe, and his name was Napharim. He lived somewhere out in the Peace River country, and I've heard it stated that he killed in his lifetime more than 80,000 living things, some big, some bag for our one hunter." Since Trader Spear made that interesting remark, I have had the pleasure of meeting a factor at the Hudson Bay Company who knew Narfum from boyhood, and who was a personal friend of his, and who was actually in charge of a number of posts at which the Indian traded. Owing to their friendship for one another, the factor took such a personal pride in the frame the hunter won, that he compiled from the books of the Hudson Bay Company a complete record of all the fur-bearing animals the Indian killed between the time he began to trade as a hunter at the age of 11 until his hunting days were ended. Furthermore, in discussing the subject with Narfim, they together compiled an approximate list of the number of fish, wildfowl, and rabbits that the hunter must have secured each season, and thus Narfum's record stands as the following figures show. I would tell you the factor's name, but as he has written to me for many cognate reasons, it is desirable that my name be not mentioned officially in your book. I must refrain. I shall, however, give you the history of Narfum in the factor's own words. Narfum's proper name remains unknown, as he was one of 2 children saved when a band of Ojibwe were drowned in crossing a large lake that lies southeast of Cat Lake and Island Lake, and southeast of Norway House. He was called Narfum, saved from the waters. The other child that was rescued was a girl, and she was called Nisimis, our little sister. At first, Narfum was adopted and lived with a swampy Cree chief. The celebrated Kechikapanes, who was a great medicine man. When Narfum grew to be 11 years old, he became a hunter and first traded his catch at Island Lake. Then, as years went by, at Oxford House, then at Norway House, then at Fort Cheapewine, and then at Fort McCurry. After that, he went to Lesser Slave Lake, then on to the Peace River at Dunvegan. Then he showed up at Fort St. John, next to Battle River, and finally at Vermilion. The following is a list of number of creatures Narfum killed, but of course he also killed a good deal of game that was never recorded in the company's books, especially those animals whose skins were used for the clothing of the hunter's family. Bears, 585. Beaver, 1,080. Ermines, 130. Fishers, 195. Red foxes, 362. Cross foxes, 78. Silver and black foxes, 6. Lynx, 418. Martens, 1,078. Minks, 384. Muskrats, 900. Porcupines, 19. Otters, 194. Wolves, 112. Wolverines, 24. Wood buffaloes, 99. Moose, 396. Caribou, 196. Jumping deer, 72. Wapiti, 156. Mountain sheep, 60. Mountain goats, 29. And rabbits, approximately 8,000. Wild fowl, approximately 23,800. And fish, approximately 36,000, totaling 74,573. Yes, Narfum was a great hunter and a good man, says the factor in his last letter to me. He was a fine, active, well-built Indian and a reliable and pleasant companion. In fact, he was one of nature's gentlemen who we shall be, and well may be, proud to meet in the great beyond known as the Happy Hunting Grounds. Thus the evening drifted by, while the name of several of the best hunters had been mentioned as suitable men for me to accompany on their hunting trail. It was suggested that as the men themselves would probably visit the post in the morning, I would have a chat with them before making my selection. Both Mackenzie and Spear, however, seemed much in favor of my going with an Indian called Ukuhu. Presently the clock struck 10, and we turned in, the free trader sharing a big feather bed with me. Next chapter, their summer life. After breakfast, Next morning, I strolled about the picturesque point. It was a windless, hazy day, and early frost had already clothed a number of trees with their gorgeous autumn mantles, the forerunners of Indian summer, the most glorious season of the northern year. When I turned down towards the wharf, I found a score of Indians and half-breeds, breed trippers, unloading freight from a couple of 6-fathom birch bark canoes. Eager men and boys were good-natured, loading themselves with packs and hurrying away with them to the shore house, while others were lounging around or applauding the carriers with the heaviest loads. As the packers hurried by, Delarond, the jovial, swarthy-faced French-Canadian clerk, notebook in hand, checked the numbers of pieces. Over by the log huts, a group of Indian women were sitting in the shade, talking to Delarond's Indian wife, all about and in and out of the Indian lodges. Dirty, half-naked children romped together, and savage dogs prowled around seeking what they might devour. The deerskin or canvas covers of most of the teepees were raised a few feet to allow the breeze to pass under. Small groups of women and children squatted or reclined in the shade, smoking and chattering the hours away. Here and there, women were cleaning fish, mending nets, weaving mats, making clothes, and standing over steaming kettles. Many of the men had joined the Good Brigade, and their return was hourly expected. Many canoes were resting upon the sandy beach, and many more were lying bottom up beneath the shade of trees. The most important work undertaken by the Indians during the summer is canoe building. Some of the men and more expert at this than others. Some of the men are more expert at this than others. It often happens that the bulk of the work is done by a few who engage in it as a matter of business. Birch bark for canoe building is taken from the tree early in May. They choose sections which may run from 4 to 8 feet in length. It first cut at the top and bottom. Then the 2-inch strip is removed from top to bottom in order to make room for working. A chisel-shaped wooden wedge about 2 feet long with which the bark is taken off. Where knots appear, great care is exercised that the bark be not torn, to make it easier to pack. The sheet of bark is then rolled up the narrow way and tied with willow. In this shape it is transported to the summer camping grounds. Canoes range in size all the way from 12 feet to 36 feet in length, the smaller size being more easily portaged, is used by hunters and is known as a 2-fathom canoe. For family use, canoes are usually from 2.5 to 3.5 fathoms long. Canoes of the largest size, 36 feet, are called 6 fathom or north canoes. With a crew of from 8 to 12, they have a carrying capacity of from 3 to 4 tons and are used by the traders for transporting furs and supplies. Some Indians engage in voyaging or tripping from the trader for the traders taking out fur packs to the steamboats or railroads by 6 fathom canoes, York boat or sturgeon head, crow barges, and bringing in supplies. Others pull in parts of their time on an occasional hunt for moose or caribou or in shooting wild fowl. On their return, they potter around camp, making paddles or snowshoe frames, or they give themselves up to gambling, a vice in which they are rather prone. Sometimes 20 men or more, divided into equal sides, will sit in the form of an oval with their hair drawn over their faces that their expressions may not easily be read, and with their knees covered with blankets. Leaders are chosen on either side, and each team is supplied with 20 small sticks. The game begins by one of the leaders placing his closed hand upon his blanket and calling upon the other to match him. If the latter is holding his stick in the wrong hand, he loses. And so the game goes on. 2 sets of drummers are playing continuously, and all the while there is much chanting. In this simple wise they gamble away their belongings, even to their clothing, and sometimes their wives. When the wives are at stake, however, they have the privilege of taking a hand in the game. The women, in addition to their regular routines of summer camp duties, occupy themselves with fishing, moccasin making, and berry picking. The girls join their mothers in picking berries, which are plentiful and of great variety. Raspberries, strawberries, cranberries, blueberries, gooseberries, swamp berries, Saskatoon berries, Pembina berries, pheasant berries, bearberries, and snake berries. They gather also wild celery and roots of rushes and the inner bark of the poplar, all which they eat raw. In some parts, too, they gather wild rice before their summer holidays are over. They have usually secured a fair stock of dried berries, smoked meats, and bladders and casings filled with fish oil or other soft grease to help their bill of fare during the winter. The women devote most of their spare moments to bead, hare, porcupine, or silk work, which they use for the decorations of their clothing. They make mosquimoots, or hunting bags of plaited babich or deer thongs for the use of the men. The girl's first lesson in sewing is always upon the coarsest work, such as joining skins together for lodge coverings. The threads used are made from the sinews of the deer or the wolf. These sinews are first hung outside to dry a little, and are then split into the fine threads. The thread maker passes each strand through her mouth to moisten it, then places it upon her bare thigh, and with a quick movement rolls it with the flat of her hand to twist it, passing it again through her mouth. She ties a knot at the end, points the other, and puts it away to dry. The result is thread like a finest hair wire. For coloring moose hair or porcupine quills for fancy work, the women obtain their dyes in the following ways. From the juice of boiled cranberries, they devise a magenta dye. From alder bark, boiled, beaten, and stained, they get a dark, slate-colored blue, which is mixed with rabbit's gall to make it adhere. The juice of the bearberries give them a bright red. From gunpowder and water they obtain a fine black, and from coal tar and stain for work of the coarsest kind. They rely chiefly upon, however, upon the red, blue, and green and yellow orchids found in many parts of the country. These, when applied to the decorations of canoes, they mix with fish oil, but for general purposes the earths are baked and used in the form of powder. From scenes such as I have described, the summer traveler obtains his impressions of the forest Indians. Too often their life and character are judged by such scenes as if these truly represented their whole existence. In reality, it is but their holiday season which they are spending upon their tribal summer camping grounds. It is only upon their hunting grounds that one may fairly study the Indians. So, presently, we shall follow them there. And when one experiences the wild, free life of the Indians' lives, hampered by no household goods or other property that he cannot at the moment notice, dump into the canoes and carry with him to the end of the earth if he chooses. No, one not only envies him, but ceases to wonder which of the two is a greater philosopher, the white man or the red man. For the poor old white man is so overwhelmed with absurd conventions and encumbering properties that he can rarely do what his heart dictates. Are you guys enjoying the story? Shall I go on, or shall I stop here and read more at another time? Hello. hello, and thank you everybody who is here listening to the story. I appreciate you being here. The next question I have, can you all hear the music in the background? Is it overwhelming, or do you just not hear it? I guess I will continue on. Nobody is seeming to answer my questions. Please let me know if the music is being heard and if I sound okay. Okay, let me adjust the music just a little bit. McKay, please let me know if you can hear it now. Family hunting grounds. Don't let us decide just yet, however, whether Indians derives more pleasure from life than does the white man, at least not until we return from our voyage of pleasure and investigation. But before we leave for consolation, it is well to know that the hunting grounds in possession of the Indian tribes that live in the great northern forest have been for centuries divided and subdivided and allotted either by bargain or by battle to the main families of each band. In many cases, the same hunting grounds have remained in the undisputed possession of the same families for generations. Family hunting grounds are usually delimited by natural boundaries such as hills, valleys, rivers, and lakes. The allotments of land generally take the form of wedge-shaped tracts radiating from common centers. From the intersection of these converging boundary lines, the common centers become the hub of the various districts. These districts' center marks convenient summer camping grounds for the reunion of their families after their arduous labor during the long winter hunting season. The tribal summer camping grounds, therefore, are not only situated on the natural highways of the country, the principal rivers and lakes, but also indicate excellent fishing stations. These too, the Indians have their burial grounds. There too, these Indians have their burial grounds. Often these camping grounds are the summer headquarters for from 3 to 8 main families, and each main family may contain from 5 or 6 to 50 or 80 hunting men. Intermarriage between families of 2 districts give the man the right to hunt on the land of his wife's family as long as he sits on the brush with her, is wedded to her. But the children do not inherit that right. It dies with the father. An Indian usually lives on his own land, but makes frequent excursions to the land of his wife's family. In the past, the side boundaries of hunting grounds have been the cause of many family feuds, and the outer boundaries have furnished the occasion of many tribal wars. The past and the present headquarters camping grounds of the Strongwood Indians, as the inhabitants of the great northern forest are generally called, lie about 150 miles apart. The natural overland highways throughout the country, especially those intersecting the watercourses and now used as roadbeds for our great transcontinental railways, were now not originally discovered by man at all. The credit is due to the big game of the wilderness, for the animals were not only the first to find them, but also the first to use them. The Indians simply followed the animal, and the traders followed the Indians, and the official explorer followed the trader, and the engineer followed the explorer, and the railroad contractors followed the engineer. It was the buffalo, the deer, the bear, the wolf, who were our original transcontinental pathfinders, or rather pathmakers. Then, too, the praise bestowed upon the pioneer fur traders for the excellent judgment shown in choosing the sites upon which trader posts have been established throughout Canada has not been deserved. The credit is really due to the Indians. The fur traders erected these posts or forts upon the tribal camping grounds simply because they found such spots to be the general meeting place of the Indians, and not only situated on the principal highways of the wilderness, but accessible from all points of the surrounding country, and moreover, the very centers of excellent fish and game regions. Thus, in Canada, many of the ancient tribal camping grounds are now known by the names of the trading posts, or progressive frontier towns, or the important cities. Now, as of old, the forest Indians, after their winter's hunt, returned in the early summer to trade their catch for furs, to meet old friends, and to rest and gossip a while before the turning leaf warns them to secure their next winter's advances from the traders and once more paddle away in their distant hunting ground. Paddle away to their distant hunting grounds. The several zones of the Canadian wilderness are locally known as the coast country, the shores of the Arctic Ocean and the Hudson Bay, the barren grounds, the treeless country between Hudson Bay and the Mackenzie River, the strong wood country, the whole of the enormous belt of heavy timber that spans Canada from east to west, the borderlands, the tracts of small, scattered timber that lies between the prairies and the northern forests, the prairie country, the mountains, and the big lakes. These names have been adopted by the fur traders from the Indians. It is in the strong woods country that most of the fur-bearing animals live. Shall I go on? The next chapter is called Meeting Ukuhu. Please enjoy the music for just a moment while I go get some water. Thank you. meeting Ukuhu. About 10 o'clock on the morning after the arrival at Fort Consolation, Free Trader Spear left for home with my promise to paddle over and dine at Spearhead next day. At noon, Factor Mackenzie informed me that he had received word that Ukuhu, the owl, was coming to the fort that afternoon, and that taking everything into consideration, he thought Ukuhu hunting party the best for me to join. It consists of he said, of Ukuhu and his wife, his daughter, his son-in-law, Amik, the beaver, and Amik's 5 children. The factor further added that Ukuhu was not only one of the greatest hunters and one of the best canoemen in the district, but in his youth he had been a great traveler, as he had hunted with other Indian tribes on Hudson Bay and on the Churchill, the Peace, the Athabasca, and the Slave Rivers, and even on the faraway Mackenzie, and was a master at the game. His son-in-law, Amik, was a hunting partner. Although Amik would not be home until tomorrow, Ukuhu and his wife, their daughters, and her children were coming that afternoon to get their advances, as the party contemplated leaving for their hunting grounds on the second day, that I might look them over while they were getting their supplies in the Indian shop, and if I took a fancy to the old gentleman, who, by the way, was about 60 years of age, the trader would give me an introduction, and I could then make my arrangements with the hunter himself. So after dinner, when word came that they had landed, I left the living room for the Indian shop. In the old days, in certain parts of the country, when the Indians came to the post to get their advances or to barter their winter catch of furs, the traders had to exercise constraint, caution, to prevent them from looting the establishments. At some of the posts, only a few Indians at a time were allowed within the fort, and even then, trading was done through a wicket, but that applied only to the Plains Indians and to some of the natives of the Pacific coast, for the Strongwood people were remarkably honest. Even today this holds good, notwithstanding the fact that they are now so much in contact with white men. Nowadays, the Indians in any locality rarely cause trouble, and at the trading post, the business of the Indian shop is conducted in a quiet and orderly way. The traders who most of their bartering with the Indians in the early summer, when the hunters return laden with the spoils of their winter hunt. In the early autumn, when the Indians are about to leave for the hunting grounds, much business is done, but little in the way of barter. At that season, the Indians procure their outfit for the winter, being usually insolvent owing to the leisurely time spent about the tribal camping grounds. They receive the necessary supplies on credit. The amount of credit or advances given to each Indian seldom exceeds 1/3 of the value of his average annual catch. This is the white man's way of securing in advance the bulk of the Indian prospective hunt. Yet although a few of them are sometimes slow in settling their debts, they are never a match for the civilized white man. When I entered the trading room, I saw that it was furnished with a U-shaped counter paralleling 3 sides of the room, and with a large wood stove in the middle of the intervening space. On the shelves and racks upon the walls and from hooks in the rafters rested or hung a conglomeration of goods to be offered in trade to the natives. There were copper pails and calico dresses, painkiller bottles and Hudson Bay blankets, saw-belly and chocolate drops, castor oil and gun worms, frying pans and ladies' wire bustles, guns and corsets, axes and ribbons, shirts and hunting knives, perfumes and bear traps. In a way, the Indian shop resembled a department store, except that all the departments were jumbled together in a single room. At one post I visited years ago, that of Abitibi, they had a rather progressive addition in the way of millinery department. It was contained in a large, lidless packing case, against the side of which stood a long steering paddle for the clerk's use in stirring about the varied assortments of white women's accent headgear. Should a fastidious Indian woman request to see more than the uppermost layer? Already a number of Indians were being served by the factor and Delarand, the clerk, and I had not long to wait before Ukahu appeared. I surmised at once who he was, for one could see by the merest glance at his remarkable, pleasant, yet thoroughly clever face that he was, all his name applied, a wise, dignified old gentleman who was in the habit of observing much more than he gave tongue to, a rare quality in men, especially white men. Even before I heard him speak, I liked Ukahu, the owl. But before going any further, I ought to explain that as I am endeavoring to render a faithful description of the forest life, I am going to repeat in the next few graphic paragraphs part of what once appeared in one of my fictitious stories of northern life. I then made use of the matter because it was the truth. And for that very reason, I am now going to repeat it. Also because this transaction, as depicted in is typical of what usually happens when the Indians try to secure their advances. Furthermore, I give a dialogue in detail, as perchance some reader may feel as thorough did when he said it would be some advantage to live a primitive and frontier life though in the midst of an outward civilization, if only to learn what are the gross necessities of life and what methods have been taken to obtain them, or even to look over the old day books of the mercantiles to see what it was that men most commonly bought at the stores, what they stored, that is, what are the grossest groceries. But while the following outfit might be considered the Indians' grossest groceries, the articles are not really necessaries at all for him. For to go to the extreme, a good woodman can hunt without even gun, axe, knife, or matches, and can live happily, absolutely independent of the civilization, of our civilization. As the factor was busy with another Indian when the chief entered, for Ukahu was the chief of the Ojibways of the district, he waited patiently, as he would not design to do business with a clerk. When he saw the trader free, he greeted, Kwe, Hugma, good day, master. Good day, man Ukahu. What can I do for ye this day? Amicable, responded the factor. Master, it is this way. I am about to leave for my hunting ground, but this time I am going to spend the winter upon the new part of them, where I have not hunted for years, and where game of all kind will be plentiful. Therefore, I want you to give me liberal advances, so that my hunt will not be hindered. Pegs Ukahu, my friend, yon's an old parent, but you're well trained for a little honest man, and I's not be uncoheard upon ye. If you guys understood that, I didn't. So, saying, the factor made him a present of a couple of pounds of flour, half a pound of pork, half a pound of sugar, a quarter of a pound of tea, a plug of tobacco, and some matches. The factor generously was prompted largely by the desire to keep the Indian in good humor. After a little friendly chaffing, the factor promised to give the hunter advances to the extent of 100 skins. A skin, or as it is often called, a made beaver, is equivalent to $1 in the Hudson Bay and the Mackenzie River district, but only 50 cents in the region of the Athabasca. Perhaps it should be explained here that while Ukahu could speak broken English, he always preferred to use his own language when addressing the trader, whom he knew to be quite conversant with Ojibwe. And so, throughout this book, I have chosen to render the Indian speech as though it was translated from Ojibwe into English, rather than at any time render it in broken English. As the former, it is not only easier to read, but is more expressive of the natural quality of the Indian's speech. In older days, some of the chiefs who could speak English at all were, is it claimed, eloquent orators, far outclassing the greatest statesmen. Ukahoo, having ascertained the amount of his credit, reckoned that he would use about 50 skins in buying traps and ammunition. The rest he would devote to the purchase of necessities for himself and his party, as his son-in-law had arranged with him to look after his family's wants in his absence. So the old gentleman now asked for the promised skins. He was handed 100 marked goose quills, representing that number of skins. After checking them over in bunches of 10, he entrusted 20 to his eldest sons, Niki, the otter, to be held in reserve for ammunition and tobacco, and then to the eldest granddaughter, Nikaya, with which to purchase an outfit for the rest of the party. For a long time, Ukahoo stood immersed in thought. At last his face brightened. He had reached a decision. For years he had converted a new muzzle-loading gun, and he had felt that the time had now arrived to get it. So he picked out one valued at 40 skins and paid for it. Then, taking back the quills his grandson held, he brought 20 skins worth of powder, caps, shots, and bullets. Then he selected for himself a couple of pairs of trousers, one pair made of moleskin and the other of tweed, costing 10 skins, 2 shirts and a suit of underwear, 10 skins, half a dozen assorted traps, 10 skins. Finding that he had used up all his quills, he drew on those set aside for his wife and son-in-law's family and bought tobacco, 5 skins, files of skin, an axe, 2 skins, a knife, 1 skin, matches, 1/2 skin, and candy for his youngest grandchild, 1/2 skin. On looking over his acquisitions, he discovered that he must have at least 10 skins worth of twine for nets and snares, 5 skins worth of tea, 1 skin worth of soap, 1 skin worth of needles and thread, as well as a tin pail and a new frying pan. After a good deal of haggling, the factor threw him that number of quills, and Ukahoo manifest contentment somehow relieved the trader's anxiety. A moment later, however, Ukahoo was reminded by his wife, Ojishba, that there was nothing for her, so she determined to interview the factor herself. She tried to persuade him to give her 20 skins in trade and promised to pay for them in the spring with rat and ermine skins, or, should those fail her, with her dog, which was worth fully 30 skins. She had been counting on getting some cotton print for a dress, as well as thread and needles, to say nothing of extra chi, which in all would amount to at least 35 or 45 skins. When, however, the factor allowed her only 10 skins, her disappointment was keen, and she ended by getting a shawl. Then she left the trading room to pay a visit to the factor's wife, and confide to her the story of her expectations and of her disappointment so movingly that she would get a cup of tea, a word of sympathy, and perhaps even an old petticoat. In the meanwhile, Ukahu was catching it again. He had forgotten his daughter, so after more haggling, the trader agreed to advance her 10 skins. Her mind had long been made up. She bought a 3-point blanket, a small head shawl, a piece of cotton print. Then the grandsons crawled around and grumbled because there was nothing for them. By this time, the trader was beginning to feel that he had done pretty well for the family already, but he kept up the appearance of bluff good humor and asked, "Well, Ukahu, what wad ye be wantin' for the laddies?" "My grandsons are no bunglers, as you know," said the proud old grandsire. "They can even kill at least 20 skins for a worth of fur." "Aye," rejoined the trader. "I shall ingese them 20 feet atween them." In the goodness of his heart, he offered the boys some advice as to what they should buy. "Y'all be wantin' to buy traps, I'm jealousin', and sure you'll turn out to be grand hunters, Nimrods o' the north, that mean'll make songs about ye in the comin' years." He cautioned them to choose wisely, because from henceforth they would be personally responsible for everything they bought, and must pay skins for skin. The motto of the Hudson Bay Company. The boys listened with gloomy civility, and then purchased an assortment of useful trifles such as ribbons, tobacco, buttons, candy, rings, pomatum, perfume, and Jew's harps. The factor, Patience, was now nearly exhausted. He picked up his account book and strode to the door and held it open as a hint to the Indians to leave, but they pretended to take no notice of his action. The granddaughters, who had been growing more and more anxious lest they should be forgotten, now began to be voluble in complaint. Ukahu called the trader aside and explained the trouble. The factor realized that he was in a corner, and that if he now refused further supplies, he would offend the old chief and drive him to sell his best fur to the opposition trader in revenge. He surrendered, and the girls received 10 skins between them. At long last, everyone was pleased except an unhappy factor. Gathering his purchases together, Ukahu tied up the powder, shot, tea, sugar, and leggings of the sugar in the legs of the trousers, placing the purchases for his wife, daughter, and granddaughters in the shawl, and the rest of the goods in a blanket. Then he made the discovery that he had neither flour nor grease. He could not start without them. The factor's blood was now almost in a boiling pitch, but he dared not betray his feelings, for the Indian was ready to take offense at the slightest word. So rigid and independent did he feel, angering him now would simply mean adding to the harvest of the opposition traitor. He chewed his lower lip and offered to smother his disgust, and growled out with an angry grin, "Hoots, man, ye has gotten our muckle already. It's fear ridiculous. I jit can't give ye anything more of a." "Oh, but master, you have forgotten that I am a great hunter, and that my son-in-law is a great hunter too. This is but an outfit for a lazy man. Besides, the great company is rich, and I am poor. If you will be stingy, I shall not trouble you more." Once again the factor gave way and handed out the flour and grease. All filled out, the factor turned the key in the door. As he walked toward the house, his spirits began to rise, and he clapped the old Indian on the back good-naturedly. Presently Ukahu halted in his tracks. He had forgotten something. He had nothing in case of sickness. "Master, you know my voyage is long, my work is hard, the winter is severe. I am not very strong now. I may fall ill. My wife, she is not very strong, may fall ill also. My son-in-law is not very strong. He may fall ill too. My daughter is not." "The Ilhai," roared the factor. What's it the now? No. What's it the no? "Never mind, it will do tomorrow," muttered the hunter with an offended air. "As I am leaving sinner, it's no or it's never. Instead, the factor, who had no desire to let the Indian have another day at it, came back with, "Very minute, and I'll give ye a ween puthers and sick like, that'll keep ye a hell and hearty, I hope, till you win home again." Man, this guy's accent's crazy, I'm telling you. The factor took him back and gave him some salts, peppermints, painkillers, and sticking plaster to offset all the ills that might befall him and his party during the next 10 months. Once more they started for the house. The factor was ready to put up with anything as long as he could get them away from the store. Ukahu now told the trader not to charge anything against his wife, as he would settle her account himself, and that Amit would be back in the morning. He too would want this advance, and if they had forgotten anything, Amit would get it the next day. the factor scowled again, but it was too late. While the Indians lounged around the kitchen and talked to the factor's wife and a half-breed servant girl, the factor went to his office and made out Ukahu's bill, which read, for consolation, 18 September 1890. Advance to Ukahu and family, 164 MB, Hudson Bay Company. The Indian now told the trader that he wanted him to send the fur runners to him with supplies in 10 weeks' time, and that he must have a grease work or measure of days in order to know exactly when the fur runners would arrive at his camp. So the factor made out the following calendar. For consolation, 18 September 1890. And then a bunch of lines. Hudson Bay Company. The above characters to the left are symbolic, a method of writing taught to the Indians by the missionaries. They spell the words September, October, and November. The first represents weekdays and the X's Sundays. The calendar begins in the 18th of September and crescent marks the 29th of November, the date of the arrival of the fur runners. The Indian would keep track of the days by pricking a pinhole every day above the proper figure. Presently the factor and I were alone for a few moments, and he growled, "What do you think or the old deal? Fine, I'll go with him if he will take me." So I had to talk with the old Indian, and when he learned that I had no interest in killing game, but merely wanted to accompany him and his son-in-law on their hunt, he consented and we came to terms. I was to be ready to start early on the morning of the 20th, when Ukahu turned to the trader and said, "Master, it is getting late, and it will be later when I reach my lodge. I am hungry now, and I shall be hungrier still when I get home. I'm growing." Me, Berkey, interested the factor, and stomp fine, he bestowed upon the confident petitioner a further gratitude of flour, tea, sugar, and tallow, a clay pipe, a plug of tobacco, and some matches, so as to save him from having to break in upon his winter supplies before he started upon his journey to the hunting ground. Ukahu solemnly expressed his gratitude. "Master, my heart is pleased. You are my father. I shall now hunt well, and you shall have all my furs." To show his appreciation of the compliment, the factor gave him an old shirt and wished him good luck. In the meantime, Ukahu's wife had succeeded in obtaining from the factor's wife old clothes for her grandchildren, needles and thread, and some food. Just as they got ready to go, the younger woman, Amek's wife, remembered that her baby had brought a duck as a present for the factor's children, so they had to give the present in return, worth at least twice as much as the duck. The factor and his family were by this time sufficiently weary. Right willingly did they go down to the landing to see the Indians off. No sooner had these taken their places in the canoe and paddled a few strokes away when the grandmother remembered that she had a present for the factor and his wife. All paddled back again, and the factor and his wife were each presented with a pair of moccasins. No, she would not take anything in return, at least not just now. Tomorrow, perhaps, when they come to say goodbye. Losh me, I thought they were off and gone, explained the trader as he turned and strode up the beach. I inwardly laughed for any man, red, white, black, or yellow, who would make such a hard-headed old Scotsman as Donald Mackenzie loosen up, but certainly clever. And the way old Uka, who made off with such a lot of supplies, made him more than a match for a trader. Anyway, the next chapter is called The Best Fur District. And I will be reading that next. So, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Sorry for my flubs. I will get better as I go. Please be patient with me and my flubbing with especially the Scottish man slang. That's not the easiest to do. But we will get better. Thank you. God bless. Stay safe and stay awesome. Because each and every one of you is awesome. I'm going to let the music play just for a while longer. And I'll see you guys at the next story time.